I'm going to kick this thing off. I know you guys aren't tuning in to hear me talk anyway. You guys are here to listen to all the smart guys talk about how to run their businesses. Because to be honest with you, you know, I didn't take the smartest approach in running my own business. And like a lot of you out there, I got caught with my pants down when all this wave of cancellations hit. So um, basically, guys, I'm Greg Gibson. I'm a wedding portrait and event photographer in the Washington, D.C. area. Like a lot of you, my world got turned upside down about a week ago when the waves of postponements and cancellations hit. And I'm personally, like a lot of you, I'm personally unemployed at least until the end of April. And I've been in a bit of panic, a state of panic for the last 10 days or so, trying to figure out what the industry holds, what the future holds for our industry. So, what have I been doing with all this downtime? Well, I've been stressing a lot about work for one, but I've also been teaching myself how to live stream. So this is a brave new world I'm jumping out in here. I just started teaching myself this week, and I didn't really start educating myself about live streaming with the intent of sort of doing these photographer education webcasts. I was really more thinking about a business prospect, and that I think that going forward in the new world that we're going to face after this crisis is over, that live streaming and webcasting is going to be there's going to be a much bigger market for that, and it's going to be pushed more to the forefront than I think we perhaps thought it might be. I do want to give a shout out to a really wonderful friend of mine, Dave Chun. He's Mr. DQ Studios. He's also Mr. LivestreamGeek.com. And Dave has been a tremendous resource, and he provided a lot of support to me to even get to this point, because you have to understand, as of Monday, I had never done a live stream before. I had no idea how this process worked. And so here we are. So Dave himself has been doing a series of live streams every day this past week. I think he does them at 1 o'clock Central Time every day on his Facebook channel. His streams are just really inspirational. And he did one a few days ago about how crisis creates opportunity, and how we react to that crisis can really make or break the opportunities that come our way. And so we all need to stay positive in this time, and we need to find ways to create opportunity for ourselves in the midst of all this. So this is actually my very first live stream. Now, I've tested this stuff with friends on and off for the past week, but this is the first actual real content that I've tried to push out. So guys, the bar is low here. If we have some glitches or some snafus, please don't be mean to us. We're trying here. We really feel like we have some good information to share with you guys. We want to help you guys get through these times, and so we're trying here. Anyway, I wanted to get this show put together because I really feel like we need to get this information out there as quickly as possible to you guys. Now, we don't have a fancy YouTube studio. This is my little basement office here in my house. So hopefully we're going to improve the production quality as we move forward. I do hope to make this a regular show and keep producing some content to help all you guys weather this storm that we call the coronavirus or COVID-19 or whatever it is. So I'm really excited about this show. Like many of you guys, I have a lot of long-term client relationships that are very casual, handshake type of arrangements. So some of them will just call me up and they'll say, "Hey, Greg, can you shoot something for me next Tuesday at 10 o'clock?" And I say yes, and I give them a rate, and off we go. So there's no contract. It's a handshake agreement. And because we've worked together for so long, there's a high level of trust. And, the problem is, like many of you guys, I got caught totally off guard. I never expected something like this to happen. And so when those mass cancellations started hitting, Monday a week ago, I didn't have any protection built in to secure some of my income. So now that that's happened, like a lot of you guys, I am searching for some answers on how to protect myself in the future. I want to strengthen my contracts and understand how I can better work with my clients to come to fair resolutions when we get into situations like this. So hopefully here to give us some clarity on these issues, my good friend Matt Mendelson. We're going to have John Harrington, who's a photographer and an author of the book Best Business Practices for Photographers, and also Mickey Osterreicher, who is a lawyer and the legal counsel for the National Press Photographers Association. So I'm really humbled to have you guys all here, and I really appreciate your support. So Matt, do you have anything that you want to jump in with?
No, I guess I'd like to just start out by first of all, I'm Matt Mendelson. I've known Greg since the mid 1980s. We've worked together. He's my best buddy, and I guess he needs me for some emotional support sometime. I don't have the answers that Mickey and John will have, but I've been a photographer for 35 years now. And, if I had to sum up what we're going to discuss tonight, it's that we are looking at a forest and tree situation. The trees are the contract issues that John will help us with, Mickey will help us with. What happened to our wedding last Saturday? Of course, mine got canceled. And then what happened to next week's got canceled. Next month got canceled. I'm looking at cancellations now of every wedding, bar mitzvah through December. So now I'm dealing with a run of clients now trying to all rearrange from June dates to December. We'll talk about that. Of course, the forest issue, if we pull back, is kind of more worrisome to me. That is what happens when this is all over. We can deal with the contracts and the deposits and the retainers or whatever. Mickey and John will help us clarify those terms. But what happens in January of next year, 2021? Let's say this resolves itself. Where do we go? Companies will be back, but their earnings will be down tremendously, and photography will be the last thing on their budget. So it's not like January of next year rolls around and suddenly everything goes back and we have these great contracts coming through and companies and PR firms are willing to spend tons of money. These companies and PR firms are going to be, bankrupt, a lot of them, and they're not going to have money. So that's a much bigger concern for me. What happens, in down the line. So, but I think right now we need to discuss the trees part, and that is, how do we make sure that we have our, ironclad contracts? If we don't have ironclad contracts, what can we do? Do we need to give money back? No, don't give money back. But I think we should start off on that end, and then we can progress towards the disaster that awaits next year. So let's start with the disaster right at hand.
All right. So let's jump over to John Harrington here. John, let's see. I don't have any audio on John.
That was on my end. My bad.
Okay.
Yep.
I had muted it because I've got a household full of people because we're all in quarantine. So forgive any background noise. But I'm really glad to be here. As Mickey knows, and I would give a shout out to Mickey for all of his hard work with the National Press Photographers Association. And Mickey's got a lot of resources for photographers, especially when it comes to access issues during these quarantines. If you don't follow Mickey on Facebook or social media, you absolutely should. He puts a lot of stuff out there. Something that he posted up that I downloaded because I do wear that photojournalist hat quite a lot is documents that would allow you during a quarantine to get access to do your job and to obtain fuel if they shut down gas stations. So check with Mickey on that. Mickey may have a link he wants to put up, but I want to make sure that gets out there because when I saw him post that, I was so grateful because I have a concern about how I'm going to continue to be able to do my job as a photojournalist. I don't do just photojournalism. I do corporate commercial work, editorial work as well, and so a lot of things have been happening, as Greg alluded to, with the whole concept of cancellation fees. I've been dealing with cancellation fees for the vast majority of my career. My first cancellation issue really came about around 9/11, 20 years ago, where I had an entire day fully booked on 9/11. And I did my first assignment for the day, which was an 8 a.m. portrait out in Maryland. And what ended up happening after that was the first plane hit. And then after that, I still had 4 other assignments that day that took me late into the evening. I was leaving my first one on my way to my next job. And what I ended up finding was I get a phone call from both People Magazine and then Business Week, both asking me if I would be able to work for them for the foreseeable future, several days worth. And not only did I have work that day, but I also had work, for the following days for my clients. And I had to decline the work for Business Week and People at the time because I had contractual obligations to my clients. And when I finally got to my next assignment, the client said, "Oh no, we're canceled, and we're not having our event." And I continued to do that, and found out, because this was pretty much mostly beepers at the time. Excuse me. And I guess I'm supposed to cough into my elbow. Sorry about that, but that wasn't a cough. Nonetheless, I found that I was not only out those 4 additional contracts, but I was also lost that revenue from the Business Week and People magazine that I would have been able to work for multiple days to do my job, pay my bills, and so on and so forth. When I went back to the other clients, fortunately, I had those cancellation clauses in effect. And even though the entire country was shut down for days, even more so than it is now as far as air travel is concerned. And 3 of the 4 clients really understood, didn't have a problem with it, paid the bill. One of them was a little upset about it, but they understood. And I continue to work for all 4 of those clients to this day. So it's nice to have those kind of long-term clients. At the time, they weren't kind of my best clients, but they were certainly regular clients. And this started happening to me as well during this COVID situation. And I'm kind of doing this on the fly, so I apologize, Greg. If you can put up that intro cancellation slide, the first one in there that we've got, that would be great. And I can talk through that, and then we'll just kind of cursor through those.
Okay,
Great.
I believe that's what you're talking about.
Yes, sir. So you can go to the next one for me. So, a lot of places have cancellation policies. You can see here, this is a hotel shot I did for a big hotel chain. And a lot of times when you book a hotel, there's no cancellation charge. If you cancel it, you still have to pay. Sometimes if you book directly with the hotels these days, you can get if you cancel within 24 hours, you can get your money back. Certainly resorts do the same thing. This happens a lot across the industry. We're not the only one that should have cancellation fees because our time is valuable. And the reality is, once someone books us, as you heard from my first example, then what's going to happen next is you're going to lose the other assignments people call in. So if you can go to the next slide, Greg. Some reservations are holdable. Some reservations at, like, say, a restaurant are cancelable. For example, but if you have a Valentine's Day event, where they got a limited amount of people and everyone wanted to go out and shop, then what's going to happen is they're going to take a credit card and say it's Valentine's Day, so you need to pay. You need to pay up front. If you cancel, we're still going to charge you because we missed out on that. We were going to be booked solid. And if you go into a restaurant and you're halfway through your beverage and you decide that you're not going to eat there, and you already placed your meal and they've already fired it, they're going to still expect you to pay for it. And so cancellation charges are something that we oftentimes either directly or indirectly encounter across the spectrum. And we should have cancellation charges as well because our time is valuable and limited. If you go to the next slide, Greg.
Hey, John.
Yes, sir.
Hey, John, could you just maybe at this point answer, perhaps it's a fairly obvious question, but I mean, you don't normally cancel a Valentine's Day dinner because of an act of God. You cancel it because you're running late or you lost your date. Can you explain act of God? Because are we talking about act of God at this point? Talk a little bit.
I'm going to defer the act of God question to Mr. Osterreicher because I'm sure he'll give a far better legal answer than I will. My contracts don't give exceptions for. I have one kind of when I'm doing high-end productions where maybe it's a $30,000 job and they've paid a $15,000 advance or something. There are force majeure and act of God clauses in those contracts, but the vast majority of my contracts do not have that as an exception. And so
is a cancellation is a cancellation.
Correct. And
okay.
And cancellation for me really started even prior to 9/11 when I would have a client book me and then call me up later and they found someone cheaper and try to cancel me. And I was like, no, that's not fair because you've been having me booked for months. So here's a case study. I'm going to go back and forth with kind of along those lines. This was a while back, but nonetheless, it works out pretty well for this illustration. 7 days out, the client called for a shoot, and then there's a cancellation discussion that ensues. Greg, next slide. So here's the email. They asked me to shoot an event on this September 25th as the house photographer for this event. It was a major motion picture coming to screen here in Washington, D.C., and they only needed me for this kind of 2-hour discussion before they went off to screen the movie. Next slide. I, of course, responded back right away. Yes, we can definitely take care of that and get images off to the wire services as well. And I told them I would call shortly. Next slide. Client wrote back, thanks so much. At this time, we're just trying to get information.
Hang on a second, John. Actually, you told him you would call him Shorty, but anyway.
You're right. I'm sorry. That's my years old typo. Sorry. Give it. I won't get into who the movie was about, but that's probably not a good thing.
Sorry.
Thanks, brother. So we're 7 days out here, and they're trying to get key information, and wanted me to give them a cost estimate as well as which wires I would do handouts to. Next slide. So this is kind of the run-up to the kind of general client interaction. As you can see here in the first sentence, 5 days on the 23rd, they attached is a signed agreement for the Thursday event. They tell me they'll be my contact. They ask me for some additional information. In other words, this is all kind of pro forma conversation where I am the photographer of record and I'm doing the job. So next slide. All right, so here is the contract, okay? So this is one of the most important part of this contract as far as the cancellation issue is concerned is you see there in bold, and mind you, there's no fine print on this contract. This is a 2-page contract, and it says thank you. It asks them to sign on the second page, and then as you can see here in bold, it says, once approved an assignment from you and time committed, a cancellation fee of 100% of the photographer's fees and any expenses incurred prior to cancellation will be billed unless we are able to rebook the time we've committed to you. This is, and by the way, that photographer's fees is just that $650 number down there at the bottom, okay? That's not the full $925 because I didn't do the post-production in the gallery if it were to be canceled. And so this is what the client signed, and I do add this caveat here that I thought was fair and reasonable. If I'm able to rebook the time that they've booked me for, then I would not charge them a cancellation charge. And there have been times when I've not that I have been able to rebook the time, and then I don't charge the client a cancellation charge. Next slide. So here's that detail again, just so you can see it up a little bit bigger. $650 is the photographer's fee for this particular event coverage. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yep. There we go. All right, so 19 hours out from the event, client writes me and says that there's some crossed wires, and they're apologizing and wanting to know if there are, if you see, look at the third paragraph, whether there'll be any late cancellation charges applied, and we're so sorry, so sorry. Well, so am I, but I had other work that I could have done and wasn't able to do because I was committed to you for that period of time. So this was there's communication to me. Click forward. Next slide, please. Again, here's that clause that you saw earlier. Next slide. And so late that evening, as you can see, it was 9:40 at night. We do have a cancellation fee, and so-and-so pays with a credit card. Here's the credit card authorization form for that charge, which is less than had we done the work in the first place. Once we process the charge, we'll email you a receipt of the charge for your records. I look forward to working with the folks from your team in the near future. And that was what I sent to them at 9:40 at night. Next slide. Here's a credit card charge. Here's the form right there that we use. And I just made that up in Microsoft Word years ago. Next slide. So here you can see it's $650, and I made that point earlier. I'm just kind of highlighting, emphasizing it here. You see the $650, and then you see the $650 down there. Again, because I did not do or would not have done the post-production charges, that doesn't apply. Next slide. And I'm sorry to be corresponding at such a late hour. So this was 19 minutes later, I guess. And the client was on a plane from LA. and they give them the cancellation quote, and then they start making a variety of excuses, and would there still be some wiggle room if we really decide we want you there? And then they apologize that this is not the way they operate, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. I got the point. So I don't know what their deal was, but they booked me, and now they're trying to cancel, not because of COVID-19, but the point is this is a common occurrence with cancellation charges. Next slide, please. And then 8:45 the next morning, wanted to know if I can still be back on board for this afternoon as originally planned, and very positively, we look forward to hearing from you. Next slide. Yes, that time remains committed to you, and I did not expect to be able to rebook that time, so I'm happy to be on hand as originally planned. I look forward to seeing you and the team at 3:30, 9:54 in the morning, 4.5 hours out. We're back on the job. Next slide. Again, positive response from the client, and calling me. Anyone who knows me knows I don't have angelic patience, but clearly the client received it that way, and that's great. Next slide. All right, next slide again. And that may be the last slide, or maybe rolling back to that. So I share that with you, Greg, of that group. So let's switch back over that group. Let's switch back over to the next cancellation. I think I had a cancellation A example. And so that kind of gives you the concept of why cancellations are not just good business practices in general, but also good business practices for a situation like this. Now, here's an example of a contract from the Associated Press. If you look carefully, this is kind of the 2-page document that they use. Go ahead and click forward again, Greg. Next slide. There you go. So here's page 2. And now I'm going to highlight the postponement and cancellation policy. Click forward, please. Next slide.
That's why we're social distancing.
I know. Coughing into my elbow on that one. All right, so here's the AP's cancellation policy. If you postpone or cancel without first informing AP Images with less than 2 business days prior written notice, client shall pay 100% of the fees. So for the AP, it's 100% of quoted. Again, I show you this to you because other professional parts of the photographic community are using cancellation charges like this. Everyone might have a different policy. In this case, theirs is 2 business days. Next slide, please. Again, so we're back to that slide. Right. And then I think that's the end of A. So if I can show you B.
Let's see.
Switch over to
That's the administrative.
Okay, so there should be a cancellation fee B. I apologize for. We're going to talk about administrative fees in a second.
This one? Yeah. That's the administrative fee.
Yep.
I don't see that one, John.
All right. Somewhere in that folder I sent you, I'll see if I can dig it up. I will tell you which one it is. So I apologize for that. Let me talk about administrative fees, since we've got that up on the screen while you can see that somewhere else in that zip file. So one of the things that we found in dealing with a lot of the clients that we're working with is that what'll happen is they expect us to deliver the images same day, within a minute or an hour of the event, or within within a day or two. But then, of course, when it comes time to paying us on time, they're lax. 30 days is if you're lucky, 60, 90 days, 120 days in some instances, and so what I started doing was, like, when I was in accounting class in college, I learned this term in accounting called 210 net 30. 210 net 30 is basically an industry standard incentive for people to do business with you, where if the client pays you in 10 days, they get to take a 2% deduction off your invoice. And I gave that some thought. I'm going to cough again. Promise, no, I don't have it. I've been social distancing for the last 2 weeks, so I should be okay. What ended up happening is I said, well, unless I'm a utility company, I really can't charge interest. I'm not a credit card company. Oftentimes these are one-off or two or three a year, and I can't really roll those forward. So he came up with this idea of charging an administrative fee. It's basically a late fee. I pre-bill the client the late fee. In this case, it's approximately 10% of the estimate, and then if they pay the invoice on time, they get to take a deduction, and that's about 10. Like I said, about 10%. And I include this language in here. Greg, if you can go to the next slide. So here is the language again. You can see that at the top, the cancellation charge. The next paragraph is this is for a pretty straightforward event for about $1,000 for a couple of hours of photography. And it says photographer's fees, and then it says fee for photographic services for $50, then administrative fee. You saw that language earlier on the screen. In this case, it's $89. So the way that works is, the way the math works on this is it takes the $450, the $250 in post-production charges, the $175 for an online gallery, and the $24 in parking. And that total, as you see at the bottom, is $899. So at the bottom is $899. You look up top, and that's an $89.90 admin fee. So the client actually, in this case, for this job, got billed $988.90. And the invoice specifies that if they pay the invoice on time, they can take a deduction of $89.90. As you can see there at the bottom of the screen, it talks about how much you can deduct if you pay it on time. But you're billed the larger amount. Next slide.
So let me just jump in and ask you a quick question there, because and we talked about this earlier. So, so let's say that you have a client and you've sent them an invoice, and they have they have the lower rate, because if they pay within 30 days, then they pay $899. If they pay in more than 30 days, then they pay $988.90. But let's say 31 days later, you still haven't been paid yet. Do you then have to send another invoice to them? And then is that invoice now, because you've submitted more paperwork, now are you just perpetuating that cycle of 30 days, 30 days, 30 days, and you're never going to get paid?
So in that situation, what happens is the client is, first off, the invoice, the very first invoice that gets sent with invoice $988.90. Okay, so, and it says on the invoice, you can take this deduction if you pay on time. It doesn't say you have to. It says you may. And so on that 31st day, I will call the client and I will say, hey, I'm just following up on that invoice. We're kind of past 30 days. What's the status on payment on that invoice? And, sometimes I get, oh, I forgot. Sometimes I get, oh, the check went out 2 days ago. And sometimes I get, oh, well, we pay in 60 days. And I go, okay. And then I say, can you confirm for me that the invoice is at least in your system and queued to pay? And they'll say, yes, it is, or no, or, oh, we need a W-9. And by the way, be careful, because a lot of times clients, after you've done the job, after they've signed your contract, when they send you the W-9, they also send you some vendor contract agreement that attempts to modify the rights to your photos and give them all rights if you weren't licensing that originally. And so you really want to be careful about reading the language in kind of vendor contract forms, where it might say that everything you ever produce in the entirety of your life you give to this company. And so what I say is, don't sign those things. Send along proactively the W-9 with your EIN number if you're federal, or federal employment information, and something other than your social security number. You should be using something for your business for payment of taxes. And so what you want to do is on that 31st day, call them and say, hey, and get them to answer that question. At this point, you can say, oh, I never got it. Okay, no problem. I'll resend it to you. Again, I'm getting paid arguably for this particular invoice to follow up on it, $90 for my time to send additional emails, send more W-9s, sign more documents, sign and scan and return more documents, and wait another 30 days. I'm okay doing that when I'm getting paid an extra $90, and multiply that across 5 or 10 jobs in a month, and now I'm actually getting paid for the day's worth of administrative work that I'm doing, or I'm having to pay someone to do in order to get that work done.
All right, so back to your last slide there.
Great. So here's an example. You saw the kind of full administrative fee earlier. So in this case, this is an example of 2 different administrative fees on the contract. So I don't have to explain now why one is $218 and one is $90. You kind of saw how the math worked on the last slide. In this case, that was some portraits at the beginning, and then in this case, it's $90. So the admin fee adjusts based upon whether or not, depending upon the total of the invoice. So the first job, I think I just said, the first job was a series of kind of portraits on Seamless for a client, and then the second one was just a kind of an event job. I think that's the last slide on administrative fee. Yeah, and then
Okay.
this was the text. You can see it large.
All right.
Did you find my other cancellation clause documents or no?
Was that the one about COVID?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That one.
All right. So yeah. So this is the first one that came up recently. So the client this is the email that I got, as you can see, 4:30 on March 9th. I talked about this on social media a little bit, but this is the actual email that I got from the client. And as you can see there, please let me know if there's anything else you need for me to cancel the contract. Look forward to working with you in the future. So positive email, and they recognize there's they are canceling the contract. Next slide, please. So here is my email back to them about 2 hours later. And I explained to them I'm not surprised, and we had to turn away other work, news photography, in order to be committed to you. And then I reiterate the cancellation clause, which you heard me read earlier. But what we're doing here, and this is really important, is this cancellation clause, as you can see, it doesn't allow for acts of God, and Nikki may be able to kind of add in and say, well, they could cancel you for act of God, you just haven't noticed it, and that may well be the case. But ultimately, this language is pretty locked in, and I highlighted that for them. And I also said to them, because now I'm coming from a position where I'm not having to just put my tail between my legs and run away, I'm actually having to say, you know what? Normally, we don't allow cancellation charges to be waived or to be transferred to something else, but we recognize these extenuating circumstances, and we're following the lead of the airlines and allowing you to use the money that you paid us for credit towards future work. And that I hope, and then I kind of plead to them and say, I hope you can understand the situation we're in as well, and I look forward to working them in the future. And I told them, as you can see at the end, if we're unable to rebook those days and times, because I could have gotten a phone call for a news assignment. Otherwise, I'll forward along the invoice and a credit for our future work together, and ask them for a credit card. Next slide. So here's the client's response. Unfortunately, we made the decision to I'm sorry. So that client did pay us, and I don't know why we must be missing the slide, because this is another client. They're canceling their advocacy day because of COVID, and let us know if there's anything for us to complete the cancellation. So next slide. This was my response to that client, where I kind of point, because this was a job for May. This is a job for, I want to say, May 20th or so. And we were far outside the 2-month window that had been stated at the time. In this case, as you saw earlier, the cancellation charge is that full photographer's fees. It's $539, which included the admin fee. We start from there, and we come down to the $450, which is if you're paying with a credit card, you get to take that 30-day discount. And so this was what I emailed back to the client. And next slide. And they wanted to confirm that they could use it as a credit towards a future event. And could we give you the credit card information in an email? And it might be the last slide, or there might be another one. Yes, I reaffirmed to them that due to the circumstances, we're doing this credit and this client, and I had them send me the credit card information in 2 emails from a security standpoint, and that was it. Are there any more slides? Is that it? Got it. Yeah, there you go. And so this is, thank you again. So this was, I don't know how this got out of order, my apologies, but that the big fly-in that was referred earlier. Client says, I completely understand. In fact, we were prepared to chalk up the fees paid as the cost of doing business. Talks about the rebooking and the credit. And then at the very end, thanks again for being so flexible. This isn't a client that's angry or upset or feels taken advantage of. This was a client that was appreciative that I'm being flexible. And so I get to come in from a position of strength and generosity and waiving my cancellation charges to a credit instead of just charging it and saying, too bad, so sad. Because, we're all kind of in this together. And so I need to be able to still pay my bills and stay in business. And they understand that. And so that's kind of how both of those things ended up. Two happy clients in the last, week or so, 11 days in this case, that were happy to, pay the cancellation charges and understood. I think that might be the last slide.
Yeah,
on
that's
the
it.
Can I?
So thanks, John.
Yeah.
I want to jump in and let. Oh, Matt, do you have a question?
No, I don't want to. I don't want to delay Mickey, but I do have a question. And my question would be, for those of us who are working outside of the corporate event arena and more in weddings, bar mitzvahs, whatever, the average deposit might be $2,500, not $500, $3,000. We're talking about $8,000 fees. And more importantly, we're dealing with clients who are not corporations, and who, for them to potentially lose a $2,500 deposit is a catastrophic thing. And so there's, of course, more human angst involved, whereas a corporation would write off these losses a couple. So, how would you apply policies towards a couple who are paying $8,000 for a wedding? They're about to lose their $2,500 deposit, or because I'm not available on the new date. Let's say they've gone from May 25th, and now the new date is July 2021. I'm not available. It's much harder, I think, when you're dealing with people rather than corporations. What do you say to that?
Yeah. So I agree with you, and clearly in these two examples that I've cited, they were corporations that have a budget and everyone gets paid a salary and so on and so forth. But it's far more personal when you have those types of events where that money came out of their hard-earned pocket or a parent's pocket, and so it's a big chunk of change for them. That first one, by the way, was a $2,500 credit, so it was not just a small amount. But to your point, I think what happens is you have a cancellation clause in your contract that's kind of straightforward and as locked down as mine is. But then you say to them when you're in communication with them, look, we generally don't waive our, we refund our cancellation charge, our contract, deposit charges. But what we can do is work with you on your future date in this particular situation because please let us know what your future dates are. And we'll work with you. And if I'm not available, I'll ensure that one of my colleagues, one of my partners, my associate photographer, whatever, will be a photographer on hand. So you kind of take the responsibility of finding them that photographer to do that work, recognizing that they're not going to have to go out and hunt and check and find someone, but that you're going to do it. You work with photographers that and you can bring in, and that we're going to do a quality job, and then you handle the post, so you get to still kind of put your signature post style on the images, and you just ask the photographer that you're working with, shoot heavy, shoot stylistic, artistic, whatever your guidance is to the replacement photographer, and you pass that replacement cost on through to the photographer if you're not available. But that's something that you get to come to from your client standpoint, and you're able to be generous and say, look, normally we don't do this, but in the situation of a catastrophic event like we're experiencing, what we'll do is we'll give you a credit towards a future date. For me, if I'm not available, then what we'll do is I'll get you an associate photographer of mine that will provide you with quality pictures. You're not going to have to start from scratch. I'm here for you. And you're coming at it from a positive standpoint rather than a shrugged your shoulders and moving on standpoint.
Great.
All right, great. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Mickey,
Sure.
Thanks so much for your patience there. And we are going
Sure,
to
Rick.
jump right in here with Mickey Osterreicher, the lawyer and legal counsel for the National Press Photographers Association. So, Mickey, you want to just kind of jump in with some thoughts and observations on what we've heard so far?
The first thing I've got to start out with is a disclaimer. I'm more than happy to talk to you and give you some advice, but please don't take it as legal advice. I recommend that you consult with your own lawyer for your own situation. I'm not licensed to practice law in every state in the United States, and therefore, I'm doing this because I can give you some general advice and some general suggestions, but don't take it as legal advice. The other thing is, the new normal Sometimes used to change, every couple of years. But now it seems we're seeing the new normal changes almost hourly. And people have to be aware of that. But that said, just to kind of give you an overview and to give you more of a legal idea of some of the things that John was talking about, and I think he gave you some really excellent suggestions and excellent pointers, is that a contract has three elements to it. It's offer, consideration, and acceptance. So the offer is somebody calls John and says, hey, will you shoot pictures for me? That's the offer. And John says, yes, it's going to cost $100. And that's the consideration. And then if they accept, there you go. The problem is, and Matt mentioned this earlier, you've got clients, Greg mentioned it, it's a handshake. It's, I know you, you know me. That's what we've operated on. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is with this COVID-19, it's really changed all the rules. And so you can have a cancellation clause, and I think, that's really appropriate. But the real important part of that is it needs to be in writing. Having a verbal cancellation clause would not be enforceable. It'd be really hard to do. There are many states that when you have a contract, if it's written for more than a certain amount of money, and usually it's $500, an oral contract doesn't work. It needs to be in writing. And it protects you and it protects them. Now, whether you want to have in there the force majeure or the impossibility clause, that's up to you. And again, it should be part of consulting with your own attorney when you're drafting this. So many of us as photographers are used to hearing you quote a job and then, well, my Uncle Herbie could do it for much cheaper. Well, you get what you pay for. When people do their contracts, they really should consult with a lawyer, not a matrimonial lawyer, not a lawyer that knows about admiralty law, a lawyer that deals with contracts, and a lawyer that specifically deals with contracts for photographers. And that's just so important to do, to make sure all of the things that you want are in there, that your attorney understands that. And then if push comes to shove and you have to rely on enforcing the contract, you've already got a relationship established with somebody. I can't tell you how many calls that I get over and over again from people who are calling me for what do I do after the fact, after their images were infringed upon. And the first question I ask is, did you register them with the Copyright Office? Again, that's something in writing that's much more enforceable than, oh my God, you took my work, what do I do now? So these are important things to keep in mind. I'll try and explain a little bit about force majeure. That's something that it's not man-made. It's an act of God, an earthquake, a tornado. Oftentimes we consider disasters and viruses and these kinds of things to be acts of God. It's not something that is man-made. But the more specific you can put language in those kinds of clauses, the better protected you will be. And usually a force majeure, not usually, it always cuts both ways. It protects both the person that's agreeing to the contract and the person that's drafted the contract. And another part of contract law is that if there's any ambiguity in the contract, that is construed against the person that drafted the contract. So that when you put a contract in and all the terms and conditions are not clear, which is why so many times contracts are very lengthy, because they're trying to cover everything. If there's a dispute about, well, I'm not really quite sure that the contract said this, that's going to be a problem. And it's usually construed against the person who drafted it, because the courts basically look at it as you could have put anything you wanted to in there for the person to agree to. And if you didn't include it, then you can't blame them for questioning, or you included it, but it was ambiguous. And you can't blame the person that signed it for something that might be ambiguous. If there's an ambiguous term, you have an opportunity to ask about that and clarify it. That's the whole idea of the negotiation back and forth before the contract gets signed. But really, one of the things that's important to think about in this time, John does this very professionally. I suggest that everybody do it very professionally, have those contracts, but you also need to be sensitive to who you're contracting with. Are you contracting with a big corporation and they're familiar with this and they understand it? Or you're contracting with somebody that, as Matt is getting married and is maybe entering into a contract for the first time. Even though if they bought a car, if they bought a house, that's a contract as well. So if you can offer them options, and John has shown some of those options, that's great. But one of the things that's really important to keep in mind is you can spend your life building up your reputation and you can lose it in a second because, not everybody is going to be pleased with this. So you really need to try the best you can to assert your rights and work with people. Another problem with COVID-19 is, how do you enforce a contract? Well, if you go back and forth and you can't reach an agreement, if you don't have the money ahead of time, if you haven't gotten a deposit, then you're going to have to try and enforce that contract to get the money you think you're owed. If you have, they may take you to court to get the money that they think should be refunded. The problem here is that, again, the new normal is courts are closing. Courts are not going to be dealing with these things. So how likely is it that in a reasonable amount of time, you're going to get your money back? So I really suggest as best you can to try and work it out, because the statistic is, even without this terrible crisis, that most legal cases settle. 75% of all cases settle. So what's a settlement? Well, it means that they're going to get less back and you're probably going to get to keep less, or you're going to get less from them if they haven't paid you anything. In the meantime, you paid a lawyer, you had time and expense, and so you need to balance all of those things together before you go to that kind of nuclear option of, okay, I'm suing you. I mean, so many times I see people on Facebook, you should sue. You should sue about this. You should sue about that. It's not that easy. It's very time consuming. The courts normally don't act quickly. And right now, who knows what they're going to be doing in terms of looking at those things. I mean, the other thing that I want to mention is, I'm giving you some advice. The general counsel to the National Press Photographers Association. I was a photojournalist in both print and broadcast for over 40 years. I've been an NPPA member since 1972. I think it's really important for you to join an organization, whether it's NPPA or ASMP or PPA or any of them. We basically have all worked together as a visual arts coalition to try and get the CASE Act passed, which is a small claims copyright court. But the real point is that there is strength in numbers. The National Rifle Association doesn't get Congress to listen to them because they have 4 members. They get to be listened to because they have millions of members. And the organizations that collectively try and represent you certainly have a greater voice than an individual trying to affect change. So, I mean, I'm trying to cover a lot. I'm not really sure how much time we have. I figured it's an hour, but maybe we can go over. But in the meantime, I'm hoping that there are some questions out there for either Greg or Matt or John or myself. I've given you that overview, but if there's anything that I really haven't covered yet, the one other thing, I was just making some notes to myself, a legal term, so John, in talking about things, it's up to you to mitigate damages, to see if you can make yourself available, to find that date, to find somebody else to replace you if you can't make that date. So it's not even in the cancellation, especially if you're trying to work with somebody, you need to mitigate and be able to show that you mitigated what those losses are going to be, and by acting in good faith. So with that, Greg, if you see questions, or anybody, if Matt, if John have a question about something I said, I'll be more than happy to answer those, and hopefully that gave you a pretty quick overview of things.
Hey, Mickey, it's Matt. Would you say that, I mean, in all your experience, would you say that you've ever seen anything like this, in which, our whole profession has been kind of wiped off the books for the next foreseeable future, but the companies that are hiring us are in the same position? They've just laid off 3,000, a catering firm, and the courts are not working, and the governments are not working. And I mean, have you ever seen anything like this in your life, where, I mean, a photographer trying to get compensated for a wedding deposit is going to be small potatoes, obviously, in the eyes of a court system, when Facebook is sending its employees home. So I'm just, if this has ever existed before.
I know I'm old, but I'm not like Mel Brooks's 2,000-year-old man. I mean, I think the last thing that we could get this to compare it to is probably what happened in 1918. But no, nobody's ever seen anything like this in modern time. It's affected the whole world. I mean, when Thomas Friedman talked about the world being flat, it truly is now, in terms of every country affects every other country, every industry, every person. That's why it's so critical for us to figure out a way to stop the virus from continuing to spread. I mean, unfortunately, I feel like it's going to get far worse in this country before it gets better. And I think it's going to have lasting effects on so many things, on the stock market, on people's savings, on companies that will no longer exist, on photographers who will have to go find something else to do other than photography. And that was happening, unfortunately, before all of this. This is just like a tidal wave that has really swamped everybody. So even trying to predict things and guess and give the best estimate, it's, as I said, every day, every hour, it changes. So what was normal before is not normal anymore. I mean, there was a saying, it was like, the only thing that's certain is death and taxes. Well, everybody used to know that April 15th was tax day. Well, it's not April 15th anymore, it's July 15th. If right. We're lucky or unfortunate, if you end up having to pay the government. So, and them having to operate without collecting taxes. I mean, it just changes the whole dynamic. So, the photographers are really in a very difficult situation, as is everybody. I mean, NPPA had lots of workshops and conferences. They had agreements with hotels. People booked hotel rooms. People had airline reservations. In some places, you get it back because it has a force majeure. But for the most part, we're trying to work with people so that, again, it rolls over and it can be rescheduled. But even rescheduling, when do you reschedule it for? I'm supposed to do all this training in preparation for the DNC and RNC in July and August. I don't even know if there are going to be political conventions come the summer. So trying to predict stuff, but no, I haven't seen anything like it, but neither has anybody else.
Not to mention that the Olympics is almost certainly to be postponed at this point in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, everything that we know of as normal is changing. Greg, do you have any questions from people that are watching?
I do. I want to jump in with a couple of things here. So, Charmy Pino would like to know if you could talk about force majeure a little bit more, and maybe explain exactly what it is, and how a well-structured force majeure contract or clause looks like.
I think the easiest way to do it, I mean, we could put up a definition but again, it's not a secret. If you Google force majeure, you will see many definitions of it. They're all pretty similar, talking about it as being an act of God. But the clause itself can be written as broadly as you want, where you just say force majeure and don't define what some of those acts could be. You could go through a number of different things: hurricane, tornado, earthquake, and then go on to say any one of which could be that. You can talk about civil unrest. You could talk about martial law. You could talk about disasters, which in some cases, like martial law, would not be considered an act of God because it's an act of man. But it creates what's known in legal terms as an impossibility, that no matter how much you want to try to perform the contract, it's impossible for you to do it. If they do a shelter in place and you can't go out, if they close the schools that you're having your conference at, if let's say Matt is scheduled to shoot a wedding in some other place other than his hometown, and the airlines stop flying and the trains stop rolling on the rails, it's pretty impossible for him to get there, and cars are prevented from driving on the roads. So you can be as specific or as general as you want when you come to that. But it's really based on impossibility, and most of it is the impossibility as a result of an act of God.
So let me just jump in and say, you guys that are watching on Facebook, it does look like we had an issue with the YouTube stream, but if you guys on Facebook have any questions, go ahead and enter those in the chat. I can actually see the chat comments. So if you'll pop some questions in there, that would be great. So Mickey and John, I was curious if you thought it would be worth talking a little bit about the difference between a retainer and a deposit.
Let's start. Maybe Mickey should start with that, because I know there's some legal differentials there. I can talk about it from a contractual standpoint from my own experience. But Mickey, you want to start on that, and then I'll chime in.
Sure. Usually, again, we're doing this generally. A retainer is something that you get and you retain and you work off of. So if you get a $1,500 retainer to do something, and then you're performing work over time, and usually it's like legal work, then again, per the agreement that you have, when that retainer gets drawn down to a certain point, let's say there's $250 left in the amount. So you get a $1,500 retainer, you're doing the legal work, you bill by the hour, you send them your bill with hourly breakdown, they pay you, and now all of a sudden there's only $250 left in that retainer. Then there's an agreement to replenish it, and that's pretty much how it works. A deposit is something that you give in whole, and depending on how it's defined, that deposit gets to be kept. It's non-refundable, whatever it is, and it's basically to hold that place. As John and both Matt explained, it's okay, I'm not booking somebody else for that time and that place. I'm yours. And in order to secure that, you're giving me that deposit. And that's pretty much a broad definition of how you can distinguish between the two.
So, Mickey, I think that the reason that Greg might have been asking that question is because there was a conversation in an online forum where people were discussing that perhaps retainers or deposits, one was refundable, one was cancelable, one was not. And I think so there was the question that arose by a couple of different people was the idea that, well, your deposit is, you can force someone to refund a deposit, but not a retainer. So
I understand what you're driving at on the question that they had, but we're going to go back to, it's all in the terms of the contract. Right. Some deposits are fully refundable. Others aren't. There's the broad spectrum in between of, if you cancel within a certain amount of time, you get 50%. If you don't cancel, you get 25%. It's how the contract is written, and that's going to pertain to both deposits, retainers, or anything else. It all depends on what the terms and conditions are in the contract.
Right. And I've had clients that have had me on retainer for a period of time before, and those clients, are getting a discounted rate for the quantity of hours and days that they're booking me during the course of a month, above and beyond calling me for these one-off projects. And yeah, we draw down. In my situation with the retainer that I had, I didn't want to be, it was a year-long contract, and I don't want to be in a situation where at that last year, at the last month of the year, if they hadn't drawn down all of their paid hours and days of time, they were entitled to basically just have me sit in their office for 30 days and work. So in that situation, what I did was I made the dates that they had to reach, that they could retain. I made those dates expire after 90 days, so that they could carry them over month to month, but they couldn't carry them over to the end of the contract, and that kind of protected me. And so I've used retainers from time to time, not extensively, but my deposits are when I do deposits, when I do work that has a deposit, my deposits are always non-refundable. And I work with, a lot of photographers, I'm sure Matt's among them, a lot of wedding photographers, not only do they know that they're going to be there, certainly they also know that, if they were to have a car crash on their way, they know a friend they could call to get them there. They recognize the importance of their contractual obligations to, in the wedding case, that bride and groom, bar mitzvah, whatever it is. They know they need to get there. They build in time to get there, and they also build in time, hopefully, so that when they get, if something does go wrong, they can get a hold of someone to kind of cover for them in a pinch. That's your obligation as a photographer to them, but keeping in mind that they also have an obligation to you to compensate you if their plans should change regardless of the circumstances. And my point has always been, as we've been talking about.
Hey, John, I think that's a really interesting point. Whoops, you're coming in and out. I don't know if you're still going there.
Yeah. So where I was going with that. Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just. I think it's an important point you make, which is something I hadn't thought about, which is really never give up the ship. You're saying if the client for June 22nd now has scheduled January 15th and you're not available, just keep going. Just say we are available and get somebody else to do it for you. But basically retain that job at all costs and just subcontract it out.
I think it's important, again, in the terms to define who we are. Some people look at Matt and go, I want you. I'm contracting with you to do it. Again, you might want to make sure that you structure the contract to say how that will be covered. It's not necessarily just you, but it could be, people I'm associated with. If you've got a company, then it's we, and then it's not just this single person and you're in breach because it's not you. So all these things need to be hashed out and thought through, and have a lawyer, if you're using a lawyer, and I suggest you should, draft a contract, and they should be asking all of these questions and thinking about all of these things from their experience of having done this many, many, many times before.
Sure, but let me chime in on that point, because
good point.
You can, in your cancellation clause, you want to be in a situation where you don't want to account in a cancellation clause for every eventuality. I understand Mickey's absolutely right, but if you say you cancel and deposits are non-refundable, that's no matter what. However, when they come to you with extenuating circumstances, whether that extenuating circumstance is COVID, or that extenuating circumstances is some catastrophic circumstance that you would like to extend a waiver to your policy, and that's what this is. A cancellation charge is a policy that you have, and every business has policies. And from time to time, when you call and you do business with someone and you say, I understand this is your policy, I'm asking you to waive it. And here are the extenuating circumstances. So now you're in a situation where your cancellation clause is rock solid. You cancel, no refund. But now we've got COVID, so you say, you know what? That's our normal cancellation policy. But in light of what's going on in this day and age, here's what I'd like to do for you. Let's choose it's a deposit. for future work that if I can do, I will do. If I cannot do, then I will make certain that there's someone that's of a quality caliber that will do that work. That's you coming at the conversation from a position of strength, rather than defining, 30 different terms within your contract of what cancellation is and isn't, and who can be booked. It allows you to come in with the generosity of solving their problem for them.
Very
Great.
good point, John.
Well, there's a lot of questions kind of along that line, especially from the wedding photographers, with the whole payment in full versus keeping the retainer. So, for example, here's one question: wedding in, say, September gets canceled. Technically, we're in the clear by then, but the client doesn't feel the time is right. They're not in the mood, or they feel like maybe it would be tone deaf to move forward at that point. Is that a simple case of keeping a deposit? Or another example, let's say a client paid in full for an upcoming wedding. Wedding gets pushed to the fall, but ends up not happening. Client calls off the wedding. Can they come back for a full refund or only a partial? Do we keep the deposit? I think that should be safe, but I'm not sure about the total amount. So what are your recommendations there? Let's go to Mickey on that first.
I think you need to, as John has been saying all along, work with them and see if you've got this. Hey, cancellation policy is this. I'm willing to work with you because of COVID-19. If something beyond that happens, that's totally different. And again, you can be willing to be flexible and bend, but you're working from, as John said, a position of strength of, this is our cancellation policy. I'm happy to amend, waive it, whatever, as long as you basically, remember I said offer, consideration, acceptance. You're basically renegotiating the contract with those offers and consideration and acceptance. And until you have a meeting of the minds, the default position is they paid the money under the original contract with a cancellation clause that they are in breach of. And you're just, again, trying to be helpful to them, but you've got to weigh this against what your reputation is going to be, what their situation is. It's very fact specific.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think kind of where things could end up going is a situation, say, in September or November, like the two situations that you outlined. At some point, we're going to, and maybe it's 18 months, who knows, but we don't know. But at some point, we're going to return to a point where, business on some level of normalcy resumes. And so I feel like when the example that I gave you earlier with the cancellation clause, the client was canceling a job on May 20th. And it's like, gosh, that's a little outside the window right now, recognizing that window could shift, but they made that decision. And I think that someone who's trying right now to cancel in September or November, I think that's pushing the limit a little bit. And I think that someone who's canceling in November then ends up deciding to go on to a review site and provide criticism and say, oh, my wedding was in November and they wouldn't refund my deposit because of COVID or what have you. I think that most people are going to read that and go, there was no COVID problem in November, if there wasn't. And so I think, you're out of line. But I think you're going to run into situations where I think part of the question is being asked in that September and November question is also how it's going to affect you from a public relations or marketing or review standpoint. And I think that that's a very real concern. And I think that, what you want to have, though, is if the cancellation policy is, let's say you have a $5,000 wedding, you take a $2,500 deposit for a September 25th, whatever, I don't even know if that's a Saturday wedding, and you get the client writes you when they say they're canceling, you're keeping the deposit. You need to make certain that the communication that they received that you received a communication from them that says we are canceling our wedding, and you need to write them back and say, I have canceled your wedding on our calendar. That is basically a modification of the agreement and the contract that you have. That then does permit you to open that day up to another client down the line. And that, so that if you're rescheduling people to that day, you're no longer on the hook for that first client, because you've now got in writing an amendment to the existing previous contract, and they forfeited their deposit, and someone else will get married hopefully on that same Saturday, and then you can use that to juggle all of your other obligations.
But
that
part
way
of
you're
that
not-
is, John, part of that is what I've called mitigate the damages versus getting a windfall. So let's say you cancel it, you now open yourself up to booking, you keep the deposit, and you rebook for the same amount, if not more money than the original contract with that couple was. You really should be obligated to return their refund their money on the cancellation. As you said, hey, if I'm not able to rebook, that was time that I set aside for you. But if you end up being able to rebook, I think that would be really good in terms of you get glowing reviews. You know what? We thought we lost our money. They stuck to their cancellation policy, which we understand, but they were able to rebook. And lo and behold, they gave us back our money when they were able to do that. That's a point that people need to keep in mind as well.
Sure.
Yeah, certainly.
Agreed.
Certainly, there's some moral and ethical decisions that have to go along with that, and certainly we all want to be able to treat our clients fairly. And I think the point that you made, Mickey, about mitigating damages, so many clients when they cancel do look at it as just free money for the photographer, and they don't really understand that there actually is a loss of a work opportunity there that is real. And I always try to explain to clients, I'm not like the florist or the caterer or some of the other vendors. When I commit to a client, I only commit to that client. I can't service multiple people on any given Saturday. I can only service one client. And so I have a finite number of work days available to me as a wedding photographer. And so I really need to be able to maximize all those days that I get. So
yeah, I mean, you can explain to them as you may be losing $2,500, but in the example of a $5,000 job where you have a 50% deposit, they need to look at it from the perspective of, I've lost $2,500 in the money I thought I was going to be making on the day I set aside for you.
Right. Yep.
So another kind of what I'm seeing in some of the questions here are certainly a lot of people are having tremendous number of cancellations right now, or let's not call them cancellations, let's call them postponements. And so those postponements are now going to get pushed back into the fall, where they're going to overlap with dates that people don't really have available anymore. So I think that it probably goes along the same lines of some of the things that we've already talked about. But do you have any advice for people in those situations where they're trying to reschedule postponed dates now in the fall and they're unable to work out available dates with the client?
I think John really suggested the perfect solution. Just tell them, we'll work at making sure you're covered, and then get somebody that's reputable that you're working with, and you end up subcontracting that job to them. So are you making less money? Probably, because you're going to have to pay them, but you end up with a happy client. You're not fighting over it. And they're able to then say, you know what, we understand the situation, but they covered us, and we were thrilled with the person that did our wedding, or whatever the assignment is.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, guys. Well, that's about all the questions that I've gotten. And so if anybody has any questions on Facebook, get them out to me really quickly. But otherwise, I'm just going to, yes, sir.
One thing, if you have it as a slide, remember, I think I sent you a link for NPPA for a link to some resources that we've got a resource page up. I don't know if you have it, and you can put that up. That would be terrific. And as I said, I'm not here selling memberships, but whatever you do, all of this doesn't come free, and somebody ends up having to support this. If I wasn't working for NPPA and they weren't paying me, I'd be off doing something else. But this is my love and my passion and my way to give back to a profession that I was so grateful to be able to do. But it needs support, and we need voices. We're the voice of visual journalists. So whether it's ASMP or PPA or NPPA, really consider joining some organization so the types of things and programs that we put on and the advocacy that we do on your behalf can continue. So, Greg, I don't know if you had that as a
Let's see,
slide or
Mickey.
not.
There you go.
Yep. Yep. So,
I'll post the link in the show notes and in the comments
yeah,
below, so
that'd be
people can have
great
it
if you could
directly.
put those links that I gave you up, and then all of these resources and links to them are there, and that'd be appreciated, and hopefully they'll be helpful to folks.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, so John, how do people get to your resources? Now, as I mentioned earlier, John is the author of Best Business Practices for Photographers. He's in the 3rd edition. Are books still available, or are you? How is that?
They are. Last I checked on Amazon, you can get them. That's the cheapest and easiest way to get them. So if that's a book that, check out the table of contents. What I will say to the group of people that it's stuck on to the end here is, if you choose to buy the book and you decide that it's not worth whatever you paid for the book, shoot me an email. I'll give you a full refund. Send me the book. I'll pay you full refund for what you paid for the book. I know, I'm really confident with that. I had the good fortune of having Mickey review and read a little bit of the subsection that was appropriate to MPPA, and we've got the MPPA Code of Ethics in there, and as well as other organizations, and I really feel like Rising Tide Raises All Ships, which was the origins of my writing the book. Started actually as an MPPA lecture in 1999, I think, as at a Northern Short course, and I've continued to speak on the subject, and the book became the fruits of that labor, and so it's just been a long-term passion project for me to kind of give back to my community.
Matt, any closing
Thanks,
thoughts?
Hey, Greg. I have one question, I guess, for John, and I don't want to now go off on a tangent that's going to take too long, but it's a completely different kind of topic. A lot of people obviously are talking about bailouts. People's asking, whether they're going to get a check from the government for losses incurred. For those of us who have nothing on the books through December of this year, we're looking at how are we going to pay our bills? John, are there any things photographers should do, i.e., not be a sole proprietor, be an S corp, that will help in that process when we all start looking for government handouts on this thing? I mean, does that matter?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 examples, 2 things to think about. The first thing you want to think about is, if you are a corporation, you're paying yourself a salary. If you're paying yourself a salary as an employee of your corporation, even if you're the only employee, that does facilitate you being able to potentially file for unemployment. It also gives you the ability to potentially submit what you would have been paying yourself as that employee to the federal government. At this point, I think it'd be a bit of a challenge to file to become a corporation and do that, but certainly preparing yourself for some kind of a future-proof situation would be really important. What I am doing is, I have, as at this point, around 6 or 7 different assignments where they were regular clients. I had penciled them into my calendar. I had communications from those clients indicating an intent. In addition, and I had a history of knowing what that client paid in the past. And in some instances, I had sent that client a contract that they had yet to sign and return. If they haven't signed or returned that contract, then they don't have to. Then they're not obligated to pay a cancellation charge. That's the way contracts work. However, I am keeping track on a spreadsheet of those contracts that I expected to come in and are definitive loss of revenue, and I have all the communications from that client. In the event that there is some form of a small business association bailout or consideration where you can demonstrate a loss of income, at that point, I'll be taking all those documents in a PDF that'll take me an hour or 2 to put together. I got plenty of free time right now. And submitting that as documentation for that lost revenue for my business. The key is, if you've got clients that have canceled, in your situation, if you've got a dozen weddings that have canceled, and you don't have deposits from them yet, or if you had anticipated a dozen weddings, make sure you have all that documentation. We don't yet know what, if anything, the federal government's going to do to help small businesses weather this storm. But certainly having documentation where you can prove not only a track record of revenue over these many years, but also revenue that you can definitively point to having lost between now and when normal returns, might be a mechanism by which You could get either some form of a grant, a bailout, if you will, for small business, or you might even get something as simple as a low interest or zero interest loan. So the government says, look, we know you could have earned $50,000 between now and December, and you've proven to us that, but we're not giving you $50,000, but we will give you $50,000 with a 10-year repayment policy with no interest. I'd take that deal. So it just remains to be seen what the federal government's going to do, if anything, for small business. But certainly having all that documentation together is really going to be important, and you got plenty of time on your hands right now to get it together.
All right. Well, great job, guys.
I will point out.
Go ahead, Matt.
No, don't worry.
No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted one final shout out. I was typing to the Facebook group, trying to find out if anybody's actually gotten any in the last week that was not previously scheduled, meaning new work. And I want to give one shout out to Paul Giroux, a friend of all of ours, who's showed me an incredible project that he created, and it's in the Facebook group comments. Paul is going around, this is not for profit, but it's a great idea to keep his creative juices flowing. He's going around his community and he's photographing this moment in time. Families shot behind their screens, wearing masks. He's doing this series of portraits of people during coronavirus, and they're absolutely beautiful. And so I just want to, I thought Paul was really thinking of how do I keep myself busy while I have no income, and he's doing the right thing. Check it out.
Actually, that's a really good point, and I think I may have Paul on to talk about that project actually in a future episode. And I was just trying to look for the link. I can't find it. I would have thrown it up on the screen, but yeah, it's a really interesting project. But again, I want to thank John and Mickey and Matt for being here. I appreciate all the guys that came in. We did have an issue on the YouTube feed, unfortunately. It was really hard to figure out how to actually schedule, because we're actually live streaming to two places. We're live streaming to YouTube and to Facebook, and we are actually streaming to YouTube. It's just not the URL that I posted earlier. So unfortunately, that didn't work out, but it's being recorded, and we'll get that posted online so people will be able to watch it later. Like I said, I do want to kind of make this a regular thing now while we're in the midst of this situation. One of the things that I'm looking for, that I'm trying to do in a future episode, is I want to try to bring on maybe some medical personnel who are knowledgeable about how, for those of us that do have to work, how can we not only protect ourselves, but also those that we have to interact with. And also, I think, we really need somebody to come and explain to us, or at least some of us, why this situation is far more serious than, say, just the regular flu. Because I do think that a lot of people are so stressed about being able to work. I think a lot of people aren't really taking the situation as seriously as it needs to be. So once again, John Harrington, author of Best Business Practices for Photographers. Thank you very much. Mickey Osterreicher, thank you so much. Lawyer and legal counsel to the National Press Photographers Association, and Matt Mendelson, my good buddy and my wingman. I appreciate you guys being here. If we didn't get to anything to the viewers, post them in the Facebook comments with the video. And thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.